Welcome everybody. Today we're going to begin with Talmud Eser HaSefirot, the teaching of the 10 luminous emanations. This is a commentary by Rabbi Yehuda Leib Ashlag, the Baal HaSulam, also called the Master of the Ladder, on the writings of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the writer of the Etz HaChaim, the Tree of Life. So we're going to be navigating our way through the Tree of Life with the help of the Baal HaSulam, the Master of the Ladder. First, the Arizal. דע, כי טרם שנאצלו הנאצלים, ונבראו הנבראים, היה אור עליון הפשוט, ממלא כל המציאות.
Know that before the emanated were emanated, and the creatures created, an upper simple light had filled the entire reality.
ולא היה שום מקום פנוי בבחינת אוויר ריקני וחלל, אלא היה הכל ממולא מן אור אין סוף פשוט ההוא.
There was no vacant place, such as an empty air or an empty space, but everything was filled with that simple, boundless light.
ולא היה לא בחינת ראש ולא בחינת סוף, אלא הכל היה אור פשוט, שווה בהשוואה, והוא הנקרא אור אין סוף.
It did not have a beginning or end, but it was all one simple light, completely even, called the endless light.
That is a very mystical sounding poetry here, but we need to understand these terms. Obviously, there's a lot of vocabulary here that we need to understand. So we're going to define them as we read, but it's very important to know that this paragraph, right now we're referring to a period that precedes Genesis. It's before Bereshit. Bereshit is the beginning of the Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. That's the first verse of the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this paragraph that we just read from the Arizal precedes not just earth, but heaven. It precedes Bereshit ha-shamayim, the beginning of heaven, the emanation of the upper world. So it's important to know these concepts in their Hebrew language, in the original language. So we call God Ein Sof. Ein Sof means no end. Ein Sof, endless. Ein means no, Sof means end. And the reason why we call him Ein Sof is because we don't know anything about him. We don't know anything about God. We can only define God by what he isn't. That's why he says Ein Sof, no end. We can only define him in the negative. We know that he doesn't have any end. He doesn't have any frame, no limits. So we call him by what we know, which is that he doesn't have an end. There's no end. He's endless. But when we say Or Ein Sof, it's endless light. It's different than Ein Sof. It's the light that emanates from God. Because we know that there's the light of God, and then there's God. The light of God is emanated from God. It comes from God. Just like the sun, it gives off heat. It gives off radiation. It gives off light. But it's not the same thing as the light. We benefit from the rays of the sun. We don't benefit from the sun itself. If we were connecting to the sun, we would die. We would not be able to live. Because it's going to burn us up into a crisp in an instant. So we connect to the light of the sun. So the same way with Hashem, with God, we connect to the light of God. Now, let's begin the commentaries of Baal HaSulam.
צריכים לזכור שחל חכמתה הקבלה מיוסדת על עניינים רוחניים שאינם תופסים לא מקום ולא זמן.
Bear in mind that the entire wisdom of Kabbalah is founded on spiritual matters that do not take up time or space. It's my favorite line because it's the introduction into the metaphysical world. Don't think we're talking about anything physical.
ואין העדר. ותמורה נוהגים בהם כל עיקר, וכל השינויים הנאמרים בחוכמה הזאת, אין זה אמור שהבחינה הראשונה נדרת ומקבלת צורה אחרת.
They are not subject to change or absence, and all the changes that are spoken of in this wisdom do not imply that the first form becomes absent and is replaced by a different form. So the concept of change in the spiritual realms is called Shinui Tzura. And Rav Ashlag just told us the way things work up there is very different than down here. For instance, if I were to move a cup from point A to point B in this world, it's no longer in point A, but now it's in point B. If I move it to point C, it's no longer in point A or B, but it's now in point C. The first form is disappearing. The original form is undergoing a change.
אלא השינוי האמור הוא עניין תוספת הצורה לבד.
He says that the above change rather implies an additional form. So it's just adding a new form. So if I were to move this cup from point A to point B, in spiritual terms, it's still in point A. And it's now also in point B. This is the version of time that pertains to metaphysics. The same way we have physics in this world, understanding this physical world, we have metaphysics, understanding the metaphysical world.
ותמורה אשר המחברים השתמשו בהם רק לסימנים ועלמא על שרשיהם העליונים.
And the writers of this wisdom use corporeal terms as signs to point to their upper roots. So they're trying to express a spiritual concept. So the reason why it's very hard to understand that there is no change up there, but yet still things happen, is like a flame, a candle. Because a candle, whenever you want to light another candle, it just adds another flame. It's not changing the original flame. It's not diminishing the fire from the original candle. It's just adding a new flame. Fire is infinite. If you think about it, how do wildfires spread so fast? Is it really, there's more, that fire is changing? No, it's just adding and it's burning more things. So in the spiritual realm, it's just addition. No change, no replacement, no exchangement. That's why Shamayim, the word for heavens, Shamayim is plural, by the way, has the word Esh in it. Shamayim is Esh and Mayim. Mayim is water, as fire and water, but the aspect that refers to the Esh is referring to the aspect that it's just like fire, like a flame. It's just infinite. There is no such thing as a change. So we're talking about spiritual concepts here, and this is found in the Torah. All over the Torah, we find the splitting of the Red Sea, Tree of Knowledge, Egypt, Jerusalem, the Garden of Eden. We talk about physical concepts, right? They're historic things. They're really supposed to be physical. But they're also deeper than that, because there's Derech Pardes. Remember, the system of the Arizal is in 4 levels. That we have to understand the world and the Torah in 4 different levels. Pshat is the literal stories, the simple understanding. Remez is the hinting level, is the kind of a deeper level than the Pshat. Drosh is the allegorical or metaphorical level, which is an even deeper step. And the last and final, the deepest level is Sod, which means mystical or secret. It's the deepest level of understanding the Torah, but not just the Torah. This is the deepest level of understanding the world. I mean, there's 4 phases in everything. We've talked about the name of God is Yud, He, Vav, He. Those refer to the 4 phases. These are also 4 phases here. Pshat, Remesh, Drosh, Sod. So when God created the world, it's brought in the Midrash that He gave us 2 Torahs. The one is the 5 books, is the written Torah. But the second one was embodied in the world. Meaning it's the same Torah. It's the same Torah. It's not 2 Torahs. But it's embodied also in the world around us. Which is why we also have the oral Torah. Because it's the tradition of how to understand what's written in the physical, in the written Torah. So you can think about this in terms of 4 different levels of desire. I mean, there's some people in this world who they don't really want much out of life. They have a very simple personality, very simple desires and goals in their life. They just want to have a simple thing. They don't ask too many questions. They don't want anything big. They just do what they're told. They're pretty obedient people. Kind of like religious people. If they don't ask questions, they act on blind faith only. Or if you're in society, you go by the rules of society without having any questions or trying to seek the truth. So that's a very pashut level. That's the first level. Remez is a deeper level. It might be when you start asking questions. You start trying to find meaning. You start trying to find yourself and find the truth. And then drosh might be whenever you start finding that meaning. You start connecting and you start making relationships and you're finding meaning in your life. And maybe you find connections between science and spirituality. You know, science is advancing at the same time that people are learning Torah. Proportionately, by the way. So there could be lots of connections that you can find there. And then Sod is the secret level, is the 4th level, which is the highest level of desire. That's like the greatest level of meaning in the world. Someone who has a great, nice, big personality, they're a leader, they're a proper person, they find a lot of deep understanding of the Torah and a deep analysis into the world, and they can connect with people and the Torah, of course. I mean, this is really about the Torah, but it's about the wisdom of God. So all wisdom that is true is the wisdom of God.
וזהו כל הקושי להמתחילים, כי תופסים הדברים בביטויים הגשמיים והגבולים של זמן ומקום וחילוף.
It's very difficult for beginners because we perceive matters by means of corporeal boundaries of time. It's very difficult for us to understand this.
ותמורה אשר המחברים, השתמשו בהם רק לסימנים, ועלמא על שרשיהם העליונים.
However, the authors only used those as signs to point to their upper roots. Like we said, there's 4 levels of understanding things. So when we're talking about change, or we're talking about something that sounds physical, it sounds physical. But we're talking about the sod. We're talking about the essence of what we're saying, which is rooted in the upper worlds. So for that reason, Rav Ashlag says,
בטרם אתחיל בביאור העניינים, אתמין לפרש כל מילה ומילה וצביונה הרוחני המופשט ממקום ומזמן ומתמורה.
I will make an effort to give every word its spiritual identity, detached of space, time, and change.
ועל המעיינים מוטל לחקוק היטב בזיכרונם את פירוש המילות ההן, כי אי אפשר לחזור עליהן בכל פעם.
It is upon the readers to memorize the meaning of these words, see we said here, thoroughly, for it is impossible to repeat them every time. So we have to really pay attention here. So if we look at the Etz HaChaim, let's remind ourselves what is the first few words, the first line of the Etz HaChaim from the Arizal. He says,
Know that before the emanated were emanated, and the creatures created.
Stop. What do you mean before? He says the word before. That refers to the time. It implies that there is a past. So how can you say, how can the Arizal in the Etz HaChaim tell us that there was a before? He's saying before everything was created. But what before? There was no time up there. So Rav Ashlag defines the term before. He tells us that when we're speaking about a relationship between cause and effect, we express the cause by the term before, and we express the effect with the term after. So, spiritual time, there is no before and after. It's just cause and effect. When it says before the emanated were emanated, and before the creatures were created, really is referring to that which caused those emanated beings to come to existence, which is Ein Sof.
An upper, simple light had filled the entire reality.
So before these emanated beings existed, there was an upper, simple light that had filled the entire reality. And Rav Ashlag is telling us here that the light that is referring to is the light that expands from God. The light of God, known as Or Ein Sof, the endless light.
ודע שכל השמות והתארים הבאים בחכמת הקבלה אינם בעצמות הבורא, אלא רק והאור המתפשט מעצמותו.
Rav Ashlag says you should know that all the names and appellations that appear in the wisdom of Kabbalah are not at all in the atzmut of the Creator, only in the light that expands from his atzmut. We're not referring to the essence of the Creator. Again, we are talking about the light that emanates from the Creator. And that seems like such a subtle thing, but it's very important. Look at the sun. There's a difference between the light that shines from the sun, the rays of the sun, which emanate from the sun, versus the sun itself. Life is only possible because we're at the perfect temperature here on earth. So we're benefiting from the rays of the sun, not from the sun. So too with God, we're not referring to the sun itself. We're not referring to God as he is. We're talking about the light that comes from God, known as Or Ein Sof, the endless light.
אמנם ועצמותו אין לנו שום מילה והגה כלל, כי זה הכלל כל מה שלא נשיג לא נדעו בשם, וזכור זה ואל תיכשל.
We cannot utter even a single word regarding his atzmut, because the rule is that anything we do not attain, we do not know its name. Remember that, and you will not fail. So anything you don't know the name of, it's because you haven't experienced it. You don't know what it is. Anything that you have not attained or experienced, you can't know what it is. You don't understand it. Because the only way you can give it a name is if you know something about it, so you can give it the name. But we don't know anything about the Ein Sof. The only thing we know is that he's Ein Sof. We only know what he isn't. We can only define Ein Sof in the negative. No end. But we know that there's also a name of God. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. You can't say the name. You can't pronounce it. But we know that there's a name of God. So how can you say that there's no name? So there's a difference between the name of God and God. The name of God is not God. It's the name of God. For example, you are not your name. You identify with your name because it describes you. It kind of teaches something, at least, about you. But it's not you. You are not your name. So too with God, there's a difference between Hu and Shmo, him and his name. Although they do exist in unity. We know that Hu is Shmo Echad. Adonai Echad is Shmo Echad. Him and his name are one. Nevertheless, they are separate things. I mean, not separate, they are different concepts. But they exist in simple unity. But that's a different concept. That's a different subject. So again, you cannot connect to the Ein Sof. You cannot connect to the sun. You can only connect to the light.
An upper, simple light had filled the entire reality.
So he says that an upper simple light had filled the entire reality. Had filled the entire reality.
ולכאורה תמוה מאוד. הלא המדובר כאן הוא בטרם שנבראו העולמות, ואך איזו מציאות יש כאן, אשר אור העליון צריך למילאותו.
It is seemingly perplexing, says Rav Ashlag, for it speaks of the time before the olamot were created. Thus, which reality exists here that the Or Elyon should fill? It says that an upper simple light had filled the entire reality. Rav Ashlag is asking here, what are you talking about? What reality? You're saying that before the worlds were created, but you're saying that there was a reality? You said there was no reality yet. What entire reality are you talking about?
והעניין הוא כי כל העולמות וכל הנשמות שישנם ועתידים להעבירה עם כל מקריהם עד תכלית תיקונם. הנה הם כולם כבר כלולים, בעולם הנקרא עולם אין סוף ברוך הוא, בכל תפארתם ובכל מילואם.
The thing is that all the olamot and the neshamot that exist and that are destined to be created with all their incidents until the end of their correction are all included in Ein Sof in their full measure and glory. Ein Sof is perfect. He's inclusive of the creation, but he includes much more than just the creation. He created the creation. He's not bound by heaven. He created heaven. He's endless.
באופן, סיס לנו להבחין בית עיקרים וחלילות המציאות שלפנינו.
Thus, there are two rudiments we should discern in reality before us. There are two aspects that we need to learn before we continue. So before we understand these two things that Rav Ashlag wants to tell us, let's make sure we understand what we've said so far. We have so far said that the light of God comes from God. And all the names that we're referring to, all the nicknames and the terms that we use to describe anything, is only referring to the light. It's not referring to God as He is. Only the light that comes from God. Because we don't understand God. You can't define God. This is a very important thing. Maimonides brings it down. Even when we say God knows X, Y, and Z, God knows the future, God knows everything about you, it's a complication there because you can't say knows. He's much more refined than what we would consider as knowledge or being able to know something. So, what are these two aspects that Rav Ashlag wants to tell us before we continue? Number one,
מה שהם קבועים וקיימים בעולם, הם בא בכל שלמותם ותפארם.
they are fixed
and exist in Ein Sof with their full measure and glory.
So essentially, everything that exists, everything that does exist, did exist, will exist, are all included in the Ein Sof. And they're included in all their forms. Whether they're complete or incomplete, small or big, it's all included in the Ein Sof. And that's the true reality. God is the true reality. Everything is perfect. Everything is complete. This is referring to the time that precedes Tzimtzum Aleph, by the way. Because we know that there was a contraction, which is Tzimtzum Aleph, the first contraction, where God restricted his light in order to allow for empty space within which he can create the worlds. He wanted to create the worlds, right? He wanted to have a creation. So he had to resist or restrict or contract his light because he was filling the entire reality. We read it in the Etzachai, it says he was filling the entire reality. So he had to contract his light to allow for empty space that was void of light, in order to be able to create the worlds. He emanated the light into that empty space in order to create. So that's referring to the time before the contraction, whenever everything was complete. Everything is perfect. That's the true reality. We're not living in the true reality right now because we don't see God everywhere. He is everywhere. He is everywhere because he's the true reality. But we're not living in that true reality. But that's why we want to expand our consciousness so we can perceive those greater levels of reality, which is just God. Godliness. Everything is light. Now, let's read the second aspect. What's the second aspect that Rav Ashlag wants to tell us?
עיקר הבית, כמות שהם עירובים ומשתלשלים ומתחדשים לפנינו מאחר הצמצום האלף החמישה עולמות המכונים אדם קדמון, אצילות, בריאה, יצירה, עשייה.
And idea number 2, the second aspect, is that after this Tzimtzum Aleph, which we're going to talk about, after this contraction, this is a monumental point in history, because God is trying to create heaven first. Before he created this world, he created Shamayim. He created the different olamot, which we're going to learn right now. So the second aspect is talking about the time after the contraction, which is whenever there was the 5 worlds, the heaven, the Shamayim. We have Adam Kadmon, which literally in English means primordial man. It might be a little bit confusing, but it's that which existed at the beginning. That's Adam Kadmon. Then there's Atzilut, which is the world of emanation. Bria, the world of creation. Yetzira, the world of formation. And Asiya, the world of action. So the second aspect that we're talking about is referring to a time after Tzimtzum. So before the contraction, which again, I know it's a very obscure concept, but again, the Tzimtzum was whenever God restricted his light in order to allow for the creation so he can emanate his light and start creating. He had to resist his light, create a void, and start creating. That's known as the Tzimtzum. That's only possible through the Tzimtzum. So obviously it's much deeper than what we just said right now, but that's just a basic understanding that we need. Before this contraction occurred, there was no concept of void. There was no concept of a lack of light. Remember, God, it said that the simple light had filled the entire reality. There was no such a thing as a place or a space. So, before Tzimtzum Aleph, there was no concept of empty space, meaning there was no concept of lack. There was no concept of lack. So the Ari is writing that the upper light that extends from his Atzmut had filled the entire reality. What does that mean? Had filled the entire reality. Now we have a greater picture. Meaning that entire reality that relates to their existence in the Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum was full of or Ein Sof. So continuing. The fourth line of the Arizal, which reads, there was no vacant place. What does it mean when it says no vacant place? And there's going to be a difference between what vacant place means empty air means, empty space means. They're all meaning different things. So what does it mean when it says that there was no vacant place?
פירוש כי בטרם שנבראו העולמות שהיה אז רק עולם אין סוף בסייעתא דשמיא בה בלבד כנ"ל, לא היה שם מקום פנוי, דהיינו מקום חיסרון, שיהיה ראוי לקבל בו בחינת תיקונים.
Rav Ashtak says that it means that before the Olamot were created, there was only Ein Sof, right? There weren't a vacant place, which means that there was no place of dearth that would qualify for corrections. So that's what it means. There was no vacant place, meaning that everything was perfectly complete and there was nothing to add.
כי אור העליון היה ממלא את העולם ההוא, שלא הניח מקום לתחתונים להתגדור בו להוסיף משהו על שלמותו.
Because the light, the upper light that filled that place, left no room for the tachtonim to distinguish themselves and add something to his completeness. So that basically means that there were no discriminations, there were no differences. On this level we're talking about, everything is one, remember.
אלא רק בסיבת הצמצום שנעשה, כמו שכתוב להלן, נתחדש אז בחינת חיסרון ונתהווה מקום מופנה לתיקונים.
However, because of the tzimtzum, there came about a desire, which means that there was a vacant place for the corrections to take place. Now the concept of correcting something is born.
אבל בל תטה שבמקום גשמי הספר מדבר.
However, don't be mistaken to think that the book speaks of a corporeal place. So when we say vacant place, don't even consider the fact or the idea of something physical space, some physical or corporeal sort of realm here. Because even after the Tzimtzum Aleph, we're still not talking about something physical. So much more so, before Tzimtzum Aleph, we're really not talking about anything physical. It transcends even what we think of as spiritual. It's higher than what we can ever imagine. So, after Tzimtzum Aleph, the concept of lack was born. But only then did the idea of fixing something become real. And that's the main idea here, which, let's make sure that we understand that. I'm going to leave us off for tonight. We've done pretty good class, in my opinion. I think we went through a good amount of the commentaries on the Etz Chaim. So, hope everybody really repeats this and makes sure they master what we've covered so far before they move on to the next episode. We're not just trying to jump into it. We're not just trying to rush or have ego and think we understood it. We have to humble ourselves, repeat the same tape several times, perhaps 5-10 times, before we can even move on, or even before we can even think about moving on to the next class. So thank you so much for listening. I hope everybody really was able to appreciate this, what we've learned so far. And I'll see you in class number 2.